Good morning everyone. I am back again with another part of the chapter Life Processes for Standard 10. In the last few classes we have studied about nutrition in animals and nutrition in plants. Today we are going to begin with the respiration. So as you have studied respiration in earlier classes, what actually is respiration? Respiration is a process. Whenever we talk of respiration, we generally talk of breathing, but breathing is not respiration. Respiration is a process in which energy is released. Energy is released either by using oxygen or in absence of oxygen or in presence of very small amount of oxygen. So there are three different cases. Either oxygen may be absent totally or very small amount of oxygen may be present, or even some organisms require large amount of oxygen. So we have but the main objective of respiration is to produce energy for doing all the different kinds of activities by the living organism. So it is taking place in living organism, and energy that is produced in the form of ATP, which is known as adenosine triphosphate. So we have ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So respiration is a process where energy is released. In both plants and animals, it is taking place in all living organisms. So it is in both in plants and animals, and the energy is in the form of ATP. This is also known as biological currency. This is also known as biological currency of living organism. So it is ATP. There are different types of respiration based on amount of oxygen present, because I told you it takes place even in absence of oxygen, it takes place in presence of large amount of oxygen, and it takes place even in presence of very small amount of oxygen. So on the basis of that, we have two different types of respiration. One is aerobic, which takes place in presence of oxygen, and other is anaerobic, which takes place in absence or very little amount of oxygen. So number one point is in presence of oxygen. So what we will write here? In absence of oxygen or very little amount of oxygen. Number two is complete oxidation takes place in aerobic respiration. What do we mean by complete oxidation takes place? When we will begin see the respiration equation of respiration, we see that it begins with glucose, and glucose is a 6-carbon compound. Incomplete oxidation takes place in case of anaerobic respiration. So what do we mean by this? Yes, glucose is a 6 carbon compound. So if complete oxidation takes place, that means 6 carbon is reduced to 1 carbon compound. And what is that 1 carbon compound? That is CO2. But in incomplete oxidation, we may not get the end product as CO2. Why? Because oxidation has not taken place completely. So what are the end products? Let us see. So the third difference is end product here will be CO2 plus H2O. So this is a 1 carbon compound. Glucose has been converted to CO2. In this case, glucose is either converted to, if it is in absence of oxygen, it is converted to ethyl alcohol. So if it is converted to ethyl alcohol, we have some molecules of CO2 also. Or in presence of less amount of oxygen, this is converted into lactic acid. Ethyl alcohol is a 2 carbon compound and lactic acid is a 3 carbon compound. So no CO2 is released in this case. So this is taking place in absence of oxygen, this is taking place in presence of very small amount of oxygen, and this process is also known as fermentation. So if complete oxidation is not taking place, the energy released in this case, anaerobic case, is very less. Less amount of energy is released in case of anaerobic respiration. That means number of ATP formed is less. So less energy is released. More ATPs, more energy is released. So these are the differences between two different types of respiration based on presence or absence of oxygen. If large amount of oxygen is present, it is known as aerobic respiration. If it is taking place in absence of oxygen or very little amount of oxygen is present, it is called anaerobic respiration. Complete oxidation takes place in case of aerobic respiration. Incomplete oxidation takes place in case of anaerobic respiration. After the process of respiration, the compound that is formed is CO2 and H2O. CO2 is 1 carbon compound, so it cannot be further broken down. That is why we say complete oxidation has taken place. In case of anaerobic respiration, we may have ethyl alcohol along with CO2. That is, ethyl alcohol is 2 carbon compound, and hence we call it as incomplete oxidation. And if little amount of oxygen is present, it forms lactic acid in muscle cells, that is a 3 carbon compound. Because complete oxidation takes place in aerobic respiration, more amount of energy is released in aerobic respiration, very less amount of energy is released in anaerobic respiration. We have different types of respiration based on organ of respiration. There are different organs of respiration. So based on organ of respiration, we again have different types of respiration. One organ which is seen in primitive animals is the skin itself. The skin of the body acts as respiratory organ, and oxygen goes inside the cell or comes out of the cell through the skin by the process of diffusion, and this type of respiration is called cutaneous respiration. So what is the process through which oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide comes out? It is simple diffusion, because entire skin is available for this kind of diffusion. This is seen in lower animals. Let me give you an example. Earthworm is an example of cutaneous respiration. Sponges is another example of showing cutaneous respiration. One very special type of respiration is seen in frog. Frog shows cutaneous respiration when in water. What is special about it, we will come to know as we discuss it further. The another type of respiration is respiration by trachea, which is known as tracheal respiration, and it takes place in insects. How does it goes? How does air get inside these kind of animals? They have holes present on their body surface, and they are known as spiracles. Example is cockroach. Air enters through this, and they have a network of tube interconnected with each other, and that is known as trachea. So tracheal respiration is seen in insects. Third one is branchial respiration, and the organ for this respiration is gills, and this is generally present in aquatic animals. So fishes are perfect example having gills, and oxygen exchange of gases is very efficient at gills. I had told you that frog shows a very unique type of respiration. So here we have another example, that is tadpole. Tadpole is larva of frog. They also show respiration through gills. The fourth one is pulmonary respiration, and the organ is lungs. It is present in birds, and higher vertebrates have these, birds and mammals. Now even reptiles. Amphibians also, because they live both in water and on land. So let us see, frog, adult frog, when in water they use the skin for respiration. Tadpole, that is larva of frog, use gills for respiration, and adult frog when on land uses lungs for respiration. So frog has different types of respiration. Adult frog when in water it will use its skin, adult frog when on land it will use its lung, and the larva of frog uses gills. So pulmonary respiration is through lungs, which is seen in higher animals. So this is all about based on the respiratory organs. Now let us see what happens in aerobic and anaerobic respiration. How does it produce? It will begin with glucose. Whether it is aerobic respiration or anaerobic respiration, glucose has to be oxidized in the body. And where is it oxidized? The process begins in the cytoplasm. Glucose is a 6-carbon compound. It has 6 carbon in it. This is converted into pyruvic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound. So glucose is converted to pyruvic acid in cytoplasm, which is a 3-carbon compound. Now this pyruvic acid undergoes the 3 different types of things that we studied, that is, if absence of oxygen is there, what will happen? If little amount of oxygen is there, what will happen and where will it happen? And if enough oxygen is there, what is going to happen? So if no oxygen is there, it takes place in yeast, some bacteria, and what will happen, and the process is known as fermentation. This fermentation process is used in making alcohols and beverages, in bread industry also. Because incomplete, no oxygen is there. Let me write no oxygen also so that it is clear. So in absence of oxygen, what will happen? This will form ethyl alcohol and one molecule of and CO2. Because this is a 3 carbon compound, we need to have 3. We have 2 over here and 1 over here. So ethyl alcohol and CO2 is formed in absence of oxygen in yeast and bacteria, and the process is known as fermentation, which is used in making of beverages and alcohol. Another process that can take place over here is in small amount of oxygen. How to write now? In small amount of oxygen in muscle cells, right? In muscle cells, what will happen over here? Lactic acid is formed, which is a 3 carbon compound. So no carbon dioxide is formed in this case, but this causes muscle fatigue. Accumulation of lactic acid in the muscle causes muscle fatigue. We have cramps in the muscle after playing. If you go to play for after a long duration, you may feel inflammation in the muscle, cramps in the muscle, that is known as muscle fatigue, and that occurs because of accumulation of lactic acid in the muscle cells. And the third one is in presence of oxygen. Enough oxygen is present and it takes place in mitochondria. What will happen? This will get converted to CO2 plus H2O. CO2 plus H2O. In these two processes, only 2 ATP molecules are produced. In both these processes, only 2 ATP molecules are produced. I had told you that less amount of energy is produced in anaerobic respiration. In this case, we have CO2 plus H2O plus energy is produced. Where has my cursor gone? Okay. Plus energy is produced, and that is 36 ATP. So large amount of energy is produced in aerobic respiration, which takes place in presence of oxygen and in mitochondria. If you look at where it is taking place, it is anaerobic respiration is taking place completely in cytoplasm, whereas aerobic respiration takes place in some amount of it takes place in cytoplasm and some part of it takes place in mitochondria. So we can add another point over there, that is E. Takes place in cytoplasm and mitochondria. Some parts of the equation takes place in cytoplasm and some part takes place in complete process in cytoplasm. So what is the fifth point of difference? Aerobic respiration, some part of the respiration takes place in cytoplasm, and after that from cytoplasm pyruvic acid is taken to the mitochondria and then further conversion takes place in the mitochondria. But in case of anaerobic respiration, the complete process takes place in the cytoplasm itself. So this is all for today. You have to remember this process very well, because this is a very sort of question for the examination. What is the process, how is glucose oxidized in different ways? That is, glucose is first of all converted into pyruvic acid in the cytoplasm. Glucose is a 6 carbon compound, pyruvic acid is a 3 carbon compound. So if you consider after oxidation of or after conversion of glucose into pyruvic acid, that is, glucose is being converted into pyruvic acid, how many pyruvic acid or pyruvate we also call it, because this is a 6 carbon compound and this is a 3 carbon compound, from one glucose molecule we will have 2 pyruvic acid molecules. So from one glucose molecule, how many pyruvic acid molecules are formed? 2 pyruvic acid molecules are formed, because 3C plus 3C is equal to 6C, and this is a 6C carbon compound. So 2 pyruvic acids are formed from one glucose molecule. So first of all, glucose is converted into pyruvic acid in the cytoplasm itself, and then depending upon what amount of air is present, that is oxygen is present, it is in case of yeast and bacteria there is no air present, so oxygen is not present there, so fermentation takes place there, ethyl alcohol and CO2 is formed. In case of muscle cells, very small amount of oxygen is present there, so lactic acid is formed in muscle cells, that leads to muscle fatigue. And in case of higher animals, we have large amount of oxygen is present, so that pyruvic acid is taken to mitochondria and there further conversions takes place, and finally CO2 and H2O is produced with releasing large amount of energy, and this ATP molecules are utilized by living organisms to do different activities throughout the day. So energy is produced in the mitochondria, hence mitochondria is also known as powerhouse of the cell, which you have already studied in earlier classes. So this is all for today. Hope you enjoyed this learning today. If you liked it, do share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe the channel and click on the bell icon to get the notifications whenever a new video is released. Thank you for watching once again.